protected it in such a way yet where I could easily import them all. So all of the books that Aubrey had for the most part, including his own, that were in his spreadsheet but had more than one author are not yet in the database. So those we're slowly adding manually. So yeah, there's a lot of work left to be done, but it's everything we need to do it, I think, is in place now.
Well, great. Let's get ready to start the second period. Our first speaker of the second period is Eric Zweig. Eric was 10 years old, and he was filling out his school news books with sports stories instead of current events. He's been writing professionally since 1985, and he's had more than 40 books for adults and children. His latest book, Engraved in History, is about the Kenora Thistles and the 1907 Stanley Cup, and it'll be published early in the new year. And this afternoon, Eric is going to provide an introduction to that story. Take away, Eric.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to share my screen here, and it's going to work. People seeing my screen now, or?
It looks good.
Yeah.
It looks good to me, Eric. It looks good to me.
Okay, good. So here we go. So, on January 17th and 21st, 1907, the Kenora Thistles defeated the Montreal Wanderers in 2 straight games, 4-2 and 8-6, to win the Stanley Cup. With a population of only about 6,000 people at the time, Kenora was and likely always will be the smallest town ever to win it. Defeated by the Wanderers in a rematch late in March, their 63-day championship run is also one of the shortest in hockey history. In a couple of months, you'll be able to read all about it. January of 2022, 115 years later, you'll be able to read all about it in my new book, Engraved in History, Kenora Thistles and the Stanley Cup. In an era when hockey in Canada was first beginning to transition from amateur to professional, which was quite a controversy in its day, fans all across the country saw the Thistles as at least being true to the amateur spirit. Even when they added Art Ross and Joe Hall from Brandon to help them beat the Wanderers in 1907, the core of the teams were all locals. Cy Griffiths, Tommy Phillips, Tom Hooper, and Billy McJimsey were future Hall of Famers like Ross and Hall, and had all grown up in Kenora when the town was still known by its original name of Rat Portage. So had Roxy Boudreau, another 1907 Cup winner, and so did other players such as Matt Brown and Tuff Bellafield, who had been with the team in its previous Stanley Cup challenges in 1903 and 1905. Only goalie Eddie Giroux, who had joined the Thistles from the Toronto Marlboros in 1905, was a true outsider, and even he would live and work in Kenora for many years. In the introduction to my book, I compare the 1900s Thistles to the 1980s Oilers. If Thistles captain Tommy Phillips was Kenora's Wayne Gretzky, then Cy Griffiths was Mark Messier. At 6'1" and weighing between 185 and 195 pounds in his prime, Cy Griffiths was huge for a hockey player in the 1900s. But he was fast, too. Because of his size and his determination, Griffiths was known sometimes as Moose, as Messier was early in his career. More often, he was known as Sox, S-O-X, although no reason for that nickname seems to have survived. By whatever name he was known, very soon after making his debut as a senior in 1902-03, Griffiths would be recognized among the best players in the game. Cy could do anything with hockey stick and puck, Kenora friend and teammate Billy McJimsey would remember in 1960, when a plaque commemorating the 1907 victory was unveiled in the town. He could play any position and he could play it well. In all my years in hockey, I don't think I ever saw another hockey player the equal of him. After the 1906-07 season, Griffiths was out of hockey until he returned with the Vancouver Millionaires for the inaugural season of the Pacific Coast Hockey Association late in 1911. He continued to play with Vancouver until 1919, and he lived there from the summer of 1906 until his death in 1950. Without that lapse in his career, Cy would have been head and shoulders above anyone else in hockey for all time, said Frank Patrick, owner of the Vancouver team and a longtime friend and teammate of Griffiths, when Griffiths died at the age of 66 in 1950, shortly after he and Patrick had both been elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame. But he was great even after all that long layoff. And perhaps, even more importantly, he was the kind of person everybody liked. We who knew him best remember him for things other than hockey, said Patrick. What an amazing sense of humor he had, one of the most infectious smiles I have ever seen. Even among all those homegrown Thistles, only the two Toms, Phillips and Hooper, had actually been born in Rat Portage. The rest all came to town with their families when they were still quite young. Because they were part of pioneering families in the young wilderness town, once I was able to obtain proper dates for the deaths on Ancestry or other genealogical websites, it was usually easy to find obituaries for one or both of the parents. You'd find the obituaries in the newspapers, and they generally would give the story of when these families came to town, and it generally matched what the hockey biographies have always said. So these are the obituaries of Matthew Brown, Joseph Boudreau, Mary Hooper, and Samuel Griffiths, which appeared in the Kenora Miner and News between 1907 and 1936. They were mothers or fathers of Thistles players over the years. Silas Griffiths, Si's father, died on March 2nd, 1912. The first stories I found confirming this were newspaper clippings from the Globe in Toronto and the Winnipeg Tribune. Like the parents of the other players, I expected to find a much more detailed obituary in the Kenora newspapers, but I never did. Still, I was able to locate his official death record in the online. It shows, this is the official death record, it shows that Griffiths had not actually died in Toronto proper, as the newspapers had said, but in Etobicoke, more specifically Mimico, and more specifically, the Hospital for the Insane in Mimico, where he'd been an inmate for 6 weeks. And if that wasn't reason enough for the newspaper in Kenora to have apparently denied him a proper obituary, the cause of death probably was hemorrhage caused by cutting throat with a razor. Now, I didn't include this in the book because it's sort of after the Thistle story and isn't really related to Kenora winning or losing. But it did present a problem for me in that I wanted to determine when the Griffiths family had actually arrived in Rat Portage, and now it was a little bit trickier. If you know anything about Griffiths, it's likely that you know he was an American, born in Kansas, Onega, Kansas to be precise, on September 22nd, 1883. He was named Silas Seth Griffiths, Silas for his father, and Seth for his mother's father, Seth Inglesby. The Griffiths family had been in Canada since at least the birth of Silas's father, Israel Griffiths, in Upper Canada, now Ontario, probably near St. Catharines around 1817. Silas was born there around 1849, but by 1865, the family was farming in New York State. It's unclear what brought Silas Griffiths to Kansas later, or how he met Emma Inglesby, but they were married in Wheaton, Kansas on April 9th, 1872, and had their first child in 1873. The Griffiths family on his mother's side has deep roots in the United States. The Inglesby family came to America from England in colonial times. According to a standard history of Kansas and Kansans published in 1918, John Inglesby was the founder of this family in America. John was born in England in 1621 and arrived in Boston in 1642. In the 220 years that followed, the family name changed from Ingoldsby with gold and a Y at the end to Ingalsby with gal and 2 E's, and then just to 1 E. During that time, Cyrus Griffiths' maternal ancestors fought in all manner of early American wars, from the British battle against France that Canadians call the 7 Years' War and Americans call the French and Indian War, to the American Revolution on the American side, to the War of 1812. During those years, the family moved from Massachusetts to New York State, where Seth Inglesby was born in a small town between Buffalo and Rochester on May 15, 1829. By 1861, Seth had moved the family to Paxton, Illinois, and despite his wife giving birth to a 5th child that year, he followed the family tradition and enlisted in the Union Army for the Civil War. Sometime after his 14 months of service, he moved the family to Kansas. In 1885, Silas Griffiths brought his wife Emma Inglesby and their growing family back to Canada. In the 1891 census, they are living in St. Catharines. In the 1901 census, the family is in Rat Portage. But when did they actually move? Without the family history that the local obituary likely would have contained, it took a while to piece it all together. As early as 1892, Silas Griffiths had mining interests around Port Arthur in northern Ontario. By the fall of 1897, he had a business as a mining broker in Rat Portage. Newspaper stories from Kansas in 1908, containing obituaries for Seth Inglesby's wife, note the passing of their daughter, Emma Griffiths, at the age of 45 in St. Catharines, Ontario on May 13, 1897. City directories from St. Catharines between 1895 and 1898 show Silas Griffiths living in that city. The first reference to the Griffiths family living in Rat Portage doesn't appear in any directories there until 1899. Given that the information for these directories was likely collected the year before they were printed, it seems likely that the Griffiths family had been living in St. Catharines through 1897 and moved to Rat Portage in 1898. Further evidence comes in local newspapers. Young Cy was certainly living in Rat Portage by the 1898-1899 school year, as an article in the Rat Portage Miner from December 30, 1898 includes S. Griffiths, along with T. Hooper, T. Phillips, and M. Brown, listed among the Form 4 students who had successfully completed their examinations prior to the end of the fall term. There is no Griffiths listed in a similar article from December 30th, 1897. Now, among the reasons this was important to me is, slightly nerdy because I like to know, and also because a key moment in Thistle's history, the evolution of the team, is said to have been a challenge game that took place in 1896. But the fact that Cy Griffiths wasn't in town until 1898 is just one reason why this game was more likely to have taken place at the end of the winter in 1899, as described in the Rat Portage Miner of March 24th, 1899. Now, there's a lot more about this in the book, but I didn't want to take too long going into it now. But anyway, so in 1899, Griffiths was clearly in high school in Kenora. And a few months later, when Tom Hooper and Tommy Phillips first jumped to the senior Thistles as 16-year-olds for the 1899-1900 season, they were still playing on the high school team that winter as well. Roxy Boudreau and Cy Griffiths were also with the high school team, with Griffiths playing as the goalie that year. After a brief appearance with the Thistles during the 1901-02 season, Griffiths would become a mainstay starting the following year and make his mark as a star during the seven-man era at the old position of the old positions of rover and cover point. Now, the Thistles are still remembered to this day, the Kenora Thistles, because they won the Stanley Cup in 1907. But Cy Griffiths felt that the Rat Portage Thistles of 1905, who lost the Stanley Cup to the Ottawa Silver Seven, were not only the best team the town ever had. In a 1914 interview, he thought they were the best team in hockey history. In a story reported in the Winnipeg Tribune on August 29, 1914, Griffiths offered the opinion that Ottawa were better stick handlers than the Thistles in their 1905 Stanley Cup series, but that as a team, we excelled Ottawa, and I believe our seven of that season was the greatest team ever placed on the ice. Now, if the Thistles were of this era were the Edmonton Oilers of the 1980s, then the Ottawa Silver Seven were the Philadelphia Flyers of the 1970s. They were
I think Eric's having some connection problems right now. He'll be back on shortly here.
My internet gave out for a second. But,
that's fine, Eric. We picked that out. My technical guys figured it was the problem. I figured it was me. That's no problem.
It seemed to be me. Like I had red lights flashing, but I'm back. So we'll try and finish this up quickly. So there's the Ottawa team from 1905.
Oh, still a little glitch. Okay, we're back going again, Eric.
The second game would be played with just one referee, and the third game, if it was necessary, which it would be, would use the two referee system in the first half and just one referee in the second half. Now, in the first game, with the two officials and hard, fast ice, the Thistles stunned Ottawa with a 9-3 victory. Tom Phillips scored 5 goals, Griffiths scored 2, and they were singled out as the best players on the ice. Ottawa had played that first game without future Hall of Famers Billy Gilmore and the great Frank McGee, who was Tommy Phillips' only rival at the time as the best player in hockey. Both were back for game 2, but the biggest difference was that with only one referee, Ottawa played much rougher. The second game of this series was the most punishing that I, or for that matter, any member of the Old Thistles was ever in, Griffiths recalled for the Winnipeg Tribune story in 1914. I don't remember exactly what the other players received for their share, but I left the ice with my nose broken in 2 places, the first time by McGee, who was equally proficient using the butt end of his stick for jabbing as the other end for shooting purposes. Later on, I had it knocked back in position by Alf Smith. Players didn't wear as many pads in those days as they do now, Griffiths continued, and from having the wood laid on, I had water on the knees, elbows, and hips. Even as late as today, and this is 9 years later, I have tangible evidence of the milling that I went through in Ottawa. The state of the ice in Game 2 drew at least as much attention as the injuries and rough play in the newspapers of the day. In Ottawa, papers only remarked on the slow or heavy conditions. In later years, it would be claimed that after Rat Portage's easy victory in Game 1, the Ottawa ice crew at Days Arena, or possibly even the Ottawa fans, had salted the playing surface in a deliberate attempt to slow down the Thistles in Game 2. That probably isn't true. However, it is possible that the ice was flooded a little too close to game time to allow it to freeze into a hard, fast surface. That's what Griffiths believed, although he didn't think that the Ottawa club had anything to do with it. Still, Ottawa won by doctoring the ice, cried the front page headline in the Manitoba Free Press the morning after Game 2. Soft ice wasn't a problem for the final game of the 1905 series, and playing with the 2-referee system in the first period, the Thistles led 2-1. Even with just one referee, there were plenty of penalties called in the second half. Phillips and McGee traded hat tricks in the game, but Ottawa rallied for a 5-4 victory on a late goal. Though everyone seemed to agree Kenora would have tied the game if there had been just a little more time left to play. It was a hard-fought game on the part of both teams, said referee Mike Grant. I do not care to say anything about the relative merits of the two teams, but it was anyone's game until the final whistle sounded. It was a great hockey game, easily the best played for the Stanley Cup. Phillips spoke for his team when he said, "We were beaten, but only by the closest possible margin. We led for 3/4 the distance and were only beaten under the wire by a nose. The gong saved the cup holders. The way the play was going, we were sure of a score within the next few minutes." A couple of minutes and they would have won, said the Thistle's honorary president, Dr. Nelson Schnarr, speaking on behalf of the club executive. Schnarr added that he really believed the results might have been different if the judge of play had been used in the second half. But it's no disgrace to be beaten by a team of caliber of the Ottawas. I'm proud of the Rat Portage boys, said Schnarr, as proud of them in defeat as in victory. Where will you find another town of this size in Canada that can turn out such a team, all with one exception, homebrews? We have been here before for the Cup and will come again. Next time we'll lift it for sure. And of course, the next time they would, but only for a little while. And you can read more about the winning in 1907 in the book. This was just, I just wanted to highlight some different aspects of the team. I will unshare my screen. And if people have, oops, no, how do I unshare it? Stop share. I hit the stop share button there. And if people have questions, I am happy to take them. That's the part I enjoy the best. I don't know if people put anything in the chat. There are.
Nothing in the chat box yet. I had one question for you, though.
Sure.
As the moderator, you mentioned Joe Hall played on the team. Did he play many games for that 1907 team?
He didn't play for them at all. He was signed. There were some player shortages and some issues in Kenora at the beginning of the 1906-07 season, and they were short some of their guys and were worried, frankly, that they weren't up to their normal caliber. And so they made a deal with Brandon to borrow on loan Joe Hall and Art Ross. Ross played and was key. Hall, I think, was there in case things got rough because the hockey in the East was generally rougher than what they played in Manitoba and particularly Ottawa. But the Wanderers in Ottawa had some very violent games earlier in that season. And I think if it had gotten rough, they'd have found a reason to get Joe Hall in there, but it didn't come down to that.
The other one that I had was Cy Griffiths born in Kansas. Is he probably, was that known that he was born in Kansas, or was,
I don't know if that was known. I don't think people at the time knew. I mean, people know now. I mean, he's listed as from Kansas on the Hockey Hall of Fame website. I think his Sir database suggests, he and Roxy Boudreau, who was born in Minnesota, are the first American-born players to play in the Stanley Cup. But Griffiths moved to Canada when he was 2. Boudreau was a little bit older. I don't know if you'd ask them if they'd have considered themselves Canadians or Americans. I suspect they would have considered themselves Canadians rather, but I don't think anybody ever asked them that. And I assume Canadians probably just assumed they were all from Rat Portage, and it never really came up much.
Good. I don't see any other items come up, chaps, or...
Their new plaque. Yeah, there is a new plaque. Somebody asked that. I mean, the plaque that was originally, the one in the picture I had, the one that's the color picture, was the newer plaque. The original one from 19... I think it's actually the same plaque. It was just moved to a different location.